Good morning to ThinkTech Hawaii. This is Alia Mashkas and Martin Despang's show Urban Transcendence. Welcome on a beautiful Saturday morning here. When you guys will watch it, of course, it's a Thursday, as our show is always on Thursdays from 1 till 2. But this morning here we are once again broadcasting from Martin Despang as the host. We're still in beautiful, even more visible this morning, Dresden, Germany. And whereas last show showed you that Dresden, or more specifically Radebeul, which is a little town very close to Dresden, is a place that's very desirable even to live. We've been with Brian Curling, who's an American artist who is in residence here in Radebeul at the Weinhaus Aust. But today is a very special day because many people from around the world come to Radebeul today, and actually yesterday started and it goes till Sunday. And this is related to someone that Radebeul is related to in history, and our special guest today is the Director Emeritus of a museum related to that person. So Rene Wagner is our guest today. Thank you very much for being with us.
Hello.
Appreciate it. And this is the first time also as a proof for extended authenticity, because Rene, although I have witnessed him that he's pretty fluent in English, but he says due to the professional scope of ThinkTech, he would prefer to have me translate it, which I'm very happy to do. So Rene, thank you for spending your time with us on a Saturday morning. A parallel, there's the festival going on that we're going to talk about. But first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and then tell us about that person that sort of, is the connection to Radebeul and what you've been doing for many decades. Also, erzähl uns ein bisschen über dich selbst und über Radebeul und natürlich über den Herrn, dessen Namen wir jetzt nennen werden.
Ja, also herzlich willkommen hier in Radebeul. Radebeul ist in Deutschland sehr bekannt durch einen Schriftsteller namens Karl May, der im 19. Jahrhundert sehr das Amerika-Bild der Deutschen geprägt hat. Nicht nur Amerika-Bild, auch das Orientbild, aber wir reden ja jetzt mal von Amerika, weil zu diesen Tagen, kamen die Festtage für diesen Mann, Karl May-Festtage, immer im Mittelpunkt stehen Indianer, die aus den Staaten rüberkommen und die einen Einblick in ihr kulturelles Leben geben.
So Rene says that Radebeul is very well known around the world for a gentleman whose name is Karl May, and Karl May was born or lived in the 19th century. I think he was born in 1842 or something like that. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. And so he wrote novels, and these novels were actually published all around the world. I did a little bit of my homework, and I read that his I think the print scope had 200 million prints of his work all around the world. And through his novels, basically, he kind of connected to the people he was writing about, and he was writing about his novels about Indians / Native Americans. We'll get to that differentiation of the terminology kind of later a little bit. So he was envisioning being in America, although he hadn't been at that time, and wrote these novels that fascinated generations of people around the world. He wasn't only writing about America, he was also writing about the Orient. So Oriental scenery was also his kind of background. And every year at the end of May is the annual Karl May Festival. So it's going on right now, and actually draws many tribal representatives and tribal leaders from America. And I once heard that these days it's where one of the largest accumulations of Native Americans in the world happen at one spot, and this is Radebeul where we are right now. So thank you very much. So you have been the director actually for almost 30 years, and just passed it on to the next generation. what got you excited about Karl May? So how's your very personal access to Karl May? Also was war dein Zugang ganz persönlicher Natur zu Karl May vor so vielen Jahrzehnten?
Also ich habe sehr gerne gelesen, schon als kleines Kind. Und Karl May als der meist verlegteste deutschsprachige Schriftsteller kam dann irgendwann auch in meine Hände und ich habe ihn faszinierend gefunden. Und ich habe mich dann mit der Kultur der Indianer beschäftigt, war in einer Vereinigung, in einem Club, wo man die Kultur nachlebte, sich mit der Kultur intensiv beschäftigte. Ja, und so war dann der Schritt im Erwachsenenalter nicht ungewöhnlich, dass ich angesprochen worden bin, ob ich nicht dann dieses Museum leiten könnte. Und das habe ich 29 Jahre getan.
So Rene, like many children, like to read. Well, that is certainly true for that generation because today things are a little different. We will get to that. However, Karl May, through the new media, made it to be transitioned, transcended, which is the show's topic, into the modern ages. But way back, you like to read. And you also were interested in other cultures. So Karl May happened to be the most published German author at that time in this kind of popular media that he was practicing. So you got excited about that, and then through that sort of developed expertise and excellence. And this is actually great, talking excellence. This is really unplugged here in the background. We're going to explain to you guys what that sound is a little bit later. So Rene got into that and established experience in excellence, and was actually then asked to run, to head, to direct the museum, and he has been doing that for 29 years. So we talked a little bit about cultures. When you were young, and then later on, this country here was, after the war was lost, Germany got split up, and this particular part was under Russian leadership, so to speak. So the Karl May Museum had to be run under GDR circumstances. And just like Karl May, I think I mentioned that before, he actually, it's whenever, hopefully the audience, we get them so excited so they will read Karl May. And for me, when I did it, when I was a kid, I was fascinated how real everything seemed. And certainly, in his realm, it was real anyways. But also then both of us having had the chance to be in the US, years later. And in fact, the last time we met was actually in Tucson, Arizona. Maybe we should talk a little bit about that later on. But Karl May, in fact, actually had never been where he envisioned the stories until the very end of his life, if I'm not mistaken. And even at that time, he really hasn't been in the part that we probably consider to be the most stereotypically Wild West, Midwest, or Southwest. He was actually more towards Niagara Falls, if I'm not mistaken, right? So how, the question will be to you, how was the life of you as a director under GDR circumstances, with, obviously because it was related to America and American history, probably the regime wasn't quite so enthusiastic and supportive of the topic in the museum. Also die Frage ist, wie eben dann unter der DDR-Gegebenheiten, wie ist es dir gelungen, sozusagen die Tradition fortzuführen, obwohl natürlich sozusagen die Regierung wahrscheinlich nicht so begeistert war, weil es um Amerika ging.
Also es wird für die amerikanischen Zuschauer vielleicht ein bisschen ungewöhnlich sein, aber dieses Museum, was in DDR-Zeit Indianermuseum hieß, Karl May war den Herrschenden etwas suspekt wegen seiner Schreibweise, die das Christentum stark betonte. Und man wollte ja in der DDR nur nicht unbedingt Christen erziehen, sondern eigentlich Kommunisten erziehen. Aber dieses Museum hat unter dem Stichwort Völkerverständigung, da legte man Wert darauf und da hat man auch wenig gestört. Also man musste sich an bestimmte Regeln halten, also die amerikanische Flagge durfte man zum Beispiel nicht zeigen. Und es ist auch so, dass die amerikanische Lebensweise nun nicht unbedingt dann gefordert wurde, sondern es ging dann immer punktuell um die Indianer, um die Kultur.
Okay, so Rene, you confirm that under the socialist regime there wasn't necessarily excitement from the leadership because Karl May's ideology or his philosophy was pretty much based on Christianity, and the GDR was more about communism and socialism, so they weren't basically compatible. But the reason why the GDR was at least tolerant towards your leadership of the museum, because it was about communication between cultures. So it was really about that they were aware that they had to somehow relate and connect. They didn't want to totally isolate themselves, which they did already enough, but they basically were supporting or at least tolerating the museum and the leadership and the message that you guys were communicating. And that's a good thing. They didn't want to, for obvious reasons, support American lifestyle. That would have gotten the people too excited, and they wanted to have more of that. But as far as under the kind of the umbrella or the window of history, they allowed sort of intercultural communication. So that's very interesting. And now I'm going to describe to you guys what the background noise was. The ones that we cut out were Harley Davidsons, so this is the modern American sound. There's a phenomenon here. There's a little train which we call the Lößnitz-Dackel. And what is Dackel actually? I don't even know the English. It's a little German dog. Audience, please excuse us. You got to look that up in the dictionary. But this is a train. It's a little steam train that runs on a narrow track, and that's actually a historical train that has been around. And coming back to GDR, one of the probably retrospectively more good things about GDR is that they were holding on to a lot of things that in the West we just threw overboard. Here, because there wasn't any alternative, they basically kept it. And so the steam train basically made it over the GDR days, and then after the reunification it was kept for more nostalgic reasons. So now it's a really integral part of the festival, and for me, who has lived in Tucson, Arizona, so very close to where most Europeans and people from the world go to see the most, what they consider the most stereotypical of Wild West. This area here, sort of surprisingly, or maybe for a good reason, has some kind of an analogy or some kind of feel. It's got some kind of, something is here. So the train is obviously, the train is an integral part of the perception of America in its pioneering days, and it's a real steam train, so it pollutes a lot, and it makes a lot of noise, but it's tradition and people love it. It's just part of this. And then the train actually goes into a valley, and that's the Lößnitzgrund. And the Lößnitzgrund has some pretty sort of on a micro scale, so people don't get the wrong impression, everything in a bonsai version. But it is. You could imagine, that Indians and cowboys come around the corner, and in fact, these days they do. I have my little nephew Julian, who is age 5, visiting, and this is one of the major events in the year. He's all dressed up. He actually bought his attire in Hawaii, talking globalism, in a cowboy store. So he's all dressed up, and he goes and he basically emerges into the culture. We in fact met last night in a saloon, and you're a familiar person to him. So it's really interesting and exciting to see that tradition sort of being carried on and continued, although times are significantly different, because I imagine when you were a kid, when you were talking about books were not the only thing, but a pretty primary way of educating yourself and also edutaining yourself. So this kind of modern word of edutainment. I remember my dad as well. He was reading the Karl May books under the blanket and having his little flashlight with him, so mom doesn't get it, So that was really the excitement. Is kind of really carrying on. So what is your feeling that after so many years, obviously through your great leadership and guidance, that people are still interested in Karl May? Also, wo kommt dieses ungebrochene Interesse an Karl May und seiner Erzählkunst her?
Also man muss sich erstmal vergegenwärtigen, als Karl May diese Romane veröffentlichte. war die Reisetätigkeit der Menschen noch nicht so, der Tourismus noch nicht so ausgeprägt wie heute. Das heißt also, man hat sich in ferner Länder geträumt, unabhängig ob in der Literatur die Wahrheit geschrieben worden ist. Sondern sie war spannend, es war interessant, es geht um Freundschaften, es geht um andere Werte wie Treue und Tapferkeit. Und das ist zum Beispiel eines dieser Aspekte, die eigentlich zeitübergreifend sind. Das ist das eine. Das andere, hier in der DDR war es dann auch so, dass die Musik, also die Country-Musik, die hat, auch hier gab es Country-Festivals in der DDR. Das ist auch ein bisschen erstaunlich, aber diese Musik hat natürlich, da dachte man an Pete Seeger, an Buddy Guthrie, hoffentlich spreche ich es richtig aus, und John Baez. Ja, und das hat fasziniert und man hat sich eigentlich auch in diese Freiheit geträumt, in diese Weite des Landes, auch wenn man das nicht kannte und keine Chance hatte, das kennenzulernen. Das ist uns ja erst nach 1990 vergönnt gewesen. Aber dieser Traum davon, auch wenn er Hollywood gefärbt ist, der ist da und das Ergebnis sieht man. 23 Jahre ist dieses Fest und kein Jahr unter 25.000 Besucher in den Tagen. Und das ist schon eine Menge. Und dieses Museum hat in diesen 80 Jahren, mehr als 80 Jahren, über 8 Millionen Besucher gehabt. Das ist ein kleines Museum.
Wow.
Und das ist viel. Und immer ging man natürlich nach Hause mit neuen Erkenntnissen über die Völker, die indianischen Völker. Ja, allerdings auch mit romantischen Hintergrund.
That's very interesting. So Rene recalls that back in the days of Karl May, the people were very limited as far as their physical way of traveling. They were pretty much rooted in their place where they were, unless they were privileged, but few people were. So people were basically sort of acting more or less locally in their realm, in their immediate realm. So these books were a vehicle and a means to basically reach out and travel in their imagination, pretty much. And this is what Karl May did in a beautiful way, that he took the people from where they were and brought them into another realm. And there are scientists, by the way, who assign Karl May really, really wonderful writing skills. And although his work is sometimes dismissed as romantic, or discriminated as kitsch or being romantic, but at this point there's an agreement amongst many writing scientists that his work is really of the highest caliber, the way he wrote, because he captured the people's imagination. So that's an aspect that's certainly true. And then maybe even more, Rene says that under the restrictions of the GDR, which was once again in times where people in the West were able to travel, but again, for the other reason, for a political reason, people were restricted. That probably helped, Karl May's popularity to carry on, in basically being once again the one who was kind of freeing the people and helping the people to live certain dreams. Country music, Rene said, which is surprising. Our co-host Alia Mashta is born in Texas and likes country music. I hope, Ali, you don't mind sharing that. So country music is another means. So there was the writing and there was the music. So that people obviously were able to know about the country music stars, and they just, music was another vehicle. Joan Baez, you were mentioning, another country artist, that basically really helped to keep this dream alive. Some numbers, you help me if I remember them correctly. You said the museum, and it's a very small museum. Our co-producer Lutz is showing you the building, and so it's a very small museum. It's a little villa. By the way, our Despang Architect and headquarters is only a few villas away, so we're neighbors to the museum, and my parents have been friends with you for many years now, ever since they moved here permanently, so there's another friendship coming out of that. And this is what Rene was saying, that basically it's these values, these sort of eternal values of loyalty, of friendship, and this is why Karl May, after all, he was sort of a humanist that believed in the good of the people, and that people that come from different backgrounds, different cultures, can work together if they want. And so this is sort of what makes the essence of these stories. So the numbers were that you said the museum exists, it's been around for 80 years, and it had 8 million visitors. Was that the number? That's very impressive, yeah. And you know, and largely, you know, you're a very humble and understated person, but largely credited to your great leadership over 29 years. So that's pretty amazing. Thank you very much for that. So I just the other day, I ran into some people again, normal people around in the neighborhood, in fact, and they said, well, you know, back in the days, people start to romanticize. They said, you know, under GDR days, you know, the museum was a little bit more authentic. We could touch everything. Whereas today, maybe because of popularity, probably insurance, I don't know, this is part of the question, things have to be more protected, to be more managed. What is your feeling when you kind of look back to the pioneering days of your leadership and how things evolved, how they progressed, maybe certain things improved, certain things maybe were tougher? Also so rückblickend betrachtet aus den Pionierzeiten deiner Museumsführung. Die eine Nachbarin hier, die sagte neulich, dass sie sagte, Mensch, ja früher zu DDR-Zeiten, wo ja viele das verromantisieren, wiederum auch die DDR verromantisieren, sagte, da war das alles noch so ein bisschen, da haben wir da in dem Pavillon gesessen, wie hieß er nochmal, der Urvater hier mit?
Frank.
Ja, der Patti Frank saß in dem Pavillon und hat dann vorgelesen und sowas. Und wie hat sich das sozusagen auch zwangsläufig und notdürftig entwickelt, die Dinge? Was sind da so die Meilensteine gewesen und die Gründe dahinter?
Als das Museum am 1. Dezember 1928 gegründet wurde, war das eine Sensation in der Presse. Wild-West-Blockhaus in Radebeul. Und in der Tat nicht so sehr die bauliche Hülle, die die deutsche Romantik widerspiegeln. Solche Blockhäuser hat es im Wilden Westen mit Sicherheit nicht gegeben. Die waren ein Überlebenskampf. Das wird manchmal vernachlässigt. Man träumt dann am Kamin über romantische Stunden am Lagerfeuer mit Gitarre oder so etwas. Das gab es sicher auch, aber das war nicht der Lebensinhalt der Menschen, die damals den Wilden Westen gewissermaßen eroberten. Ja, damals, aber diese Gegenstände, die hier sind, die sind exzellent. Sie sind aus dem 19. Jahrhundert und sie haben einen enormen kulturhistorischen Wert. Damals hatten nur wenige Wissenschaftler in den Vereinigten Staaten und Museen Gegenstände der Indianer gesammelt. Und das war damals auch nicht restriktiv, man durfte es nach Europa bringen. Und das hat Patti Frank ausgenutzt. Soll ich erstmal enden?
So Rene tells us about that when the museum was opened on December 1st, 1928. It was a phenomenal event that was well recognized locally and internationally, because at that time there wasn't really that much research going on. There's a little background noise, some people doing garden work here, so it's just an unplugged show. This is our open air studio, so hopefully you can still hear us. Then it's okay. And this kind of unpluggedness is also what. So one of the founders or main key figures was Patti Frank, and Patti Frank was really instrumental in also collecting. So this the museum is a museum and it has something to show, and these are real artifacts from all around America, and at that time that was unmatched. Actually, in America itself, the level of sort of research. Cultural and historical research wasn't to the same level as it was here. So it was unique in the world. And probably because here one was more removed, more distanced, there was a larger interest, like it is in many ways in life. When the grass is greener on the other side, is the saying. So basically here there was this raised awareness. And Patti Frank was sitting in this log hut in the yard of the Villa Shatterhand, which is, by the way, the name of the building the museum is in, and Old Shatterhand is one of the key players in the Karl May basically writings. So Rene is very nicely also critical about the romanticism that goes with sort of looking at that at that sort of exotic culture that people were sort of, their fantasy is all they were doing was sitting around the fire, holding their hands, singing songs. And he even says, even the log was sort of an interpretation, was a mystification of reality. It wasn't reality because, the Wild West in the US wasn't always fun. Mostly it wasn't, you even say, because it was the mere survival. I mean, they were kind of pioneering a country that had nothing, and it was tough. It was really tough. So you're critical about that. To a certain degree, this kind of blurring of history, of historical reality went with it. But the point is it's an interpretation, it's a reflection. So the museum is also trying to make that clear. There are certain parts that are real. These are the artifacts, and they are of real value. And you also said in these days there wasn't protectionism. So actually people were allowed to bring these things, whereas these days it's not the case anymore. And we have a current case, and we can talk a little bit that some natives basically said we want that back. That creates some discussion, but that's also true in other cultures. With the Egyptian culture, there's also similar kind of tendencies. So the museum, and Rene makes clear, and again, also his outfit is very classy, but he's clear about that. He says, I'm not imitating, I'm not pretending to live in the past. I'm living here and now, but I'm demonstrating sort of an intellectual reflection of the values that we as another culture found interesting in that culture. So that's a very interesting kind of thing. What are your favorite parts sort of in these days? I think when you look at the festival, for example, I heard some people saying, I said, has this always been so many shows and so many villages that they build up there? So how was that? How did that get started way back? And how do you see the trend today? And now that you're sort of a little bit more sort of distanced to it yourself, maybe you can also take a critical view of where you could imagine it going or not. Also nochmal die Frage, also auch das Fest sozusagen, das war wahrscheinlich sehr viel bescheidener damals in den Anfängen und hat sich sehr viel mehr entwickelt. Sicher auch dann durch die Öffnung und so auch verkommerzialisiert natürlich. Ja. Und wie siehst du da sozusagen diese Tendenz auch gerne ein bisschen kritisch, da du jetzt auch ein bisschen freier reden kannst?
Ja, also es ist immer noch die Faszination des Wilden Westens, begründet durch Filme, durch die Country-Musik, die wir schon erwähnt haben, aber auch durch die Literatur natürlich. Aber wir sind uns darüber im Klaren, es ist auch spürbar, dass in der heutigen Zeit ganz andere Medien mit da sind. Also zu meiner Zeit, in meiner Kindheit, wo ich viel gelesen habe, gab es keinen Computer. Da gab es kein SMS oder solche technischen Neuerungen. Das muss man heute den Kindern schon sagen. Also Leute, es gab mal eine Zeit, da gab es keinen Fernseher, da gab es dieses nicht. Und das hat auch Wirkung auf dieses Museum. Das spornt uns allerdings an, hier an den Originalen etwas zu zeigen. Also nicht irgendwo Hollywood oder irgendwo aufbereitet für die modernen Medien, sondern dass man sehen kann, das ist ein Pfeil und Bogen der Indianer. Also damit hat man mal Tiere gejagt, was man sich vielleicht sonst nicht vorstellen kann. Und dass man an verschiedenen Stellen auch die Fertigkeiten der Indianer nachempfinden kann, indem Kinder basteln. Aha. Also es verschiebt sich etwas die Betrachtungsweise. Und nicht alles, was sich da in der letzten Zeit getan hat, zum Beispiel eben die Kommerzialisierung, dass alles nur noch über das Geld gesehen wird, ist gut. Sondern es ist eigentlich Karl May vermittelte Werte, ja, die ich schon erwähnt habe, wie Tapferkeit, Freundschaft und eigentlich auch Liebe zu den anderen Menschen, also und auch Achtung ihrer Kultur und Religion. Das geht ein bisschen unter. Das ist, die Kommerzialisierung hat Janusköpfe, ist zweiseitig.
So Rene talks about, again, recalls that when he was young, when he got his access to Karl May, books were basically all there was. That was the most fancy device, and there was no TV, and you were almost making the gesture towards your cell phone, which you own and I own. but we just got used to them more or less recently. So there was no such thing as these things. So he says, as an educational device for culture, and then the youngest generation, which in Hawaii the children are called keiki. So for the keiki, it's a very important thing, he says, to get them exposed to that history in sort of a real way, and not through movies, which there are a lot about, Western movies and cowboys and stuff like that, but to the real thing, so they can go into the museum and they can see there is a bow. This is how they had to fight for their daily food. They couldn't go in a grocery store and buy. There was this immediacy, and sort of society was working on a much different level. And he says this is the real kind of value of the museum, and especially also of the festival, that actually him being critical about the trend and the tendency of commercialization, of capitalization, that everything has been done for the buck. And I know that Ali told me a similar story when she was working with the circus a while ago, and she was sort of shocked how it was just about buy. So these parts you see critically or as a challenge to kind of deal with and work with, that everything is driven by this capitalistic, whereas the original values of Karl May were sort of about the opposite. It was about friendship, it was about relationships, it was about love, it was about loyalty, it was about trust, it was about faith, and all these things. So his plaidoyer is basically to kind of try to run the museum, obviously, which in these days, business is involved, there are costs associated, so all these have to be taken care of in a managerial way, there's no doubt. But you're really kind of advocating for kind of keeping and holding on and focusing on these true values, which could be of tremendous educational experience for the kids. I mean, for example, my nephew Julian is a good example. He's 5 years old, he has all the whistles and bells, and he's on the phone more than we, and he knows more about that than we, which doesn't say a lot speaking for myself. But this is a very special weekend for him, where he feels this kind of unpluggedness. I mean, he's around these kind of the bad guys. You have some of the figures, on the festivals who are the bad guys, and he was very respectful of them first, because they were the bad guys, and then he kind of reached out and started to talk to them, and now they're his friends. So he's a bad guy as well and likes that, and he's not a really bad guy. So I think this is a really, really great point you make, that it's about learning from an ancient culture about qualities that we might want to rethink, we might want to reiterate, we might want to reinterpret for our own life, and stepping back a little bit from what we have sort of created around us, and sort of trying to rethink about maybe the roots or the real origin of our culture, which still is about that. Without social interaction, nothing basically works. So that's an excellent point. So what's your highlight of the contemporary shows? You're still involved. You have many functions still, although you're not operating it anymore. But you're involved more than ever. And so what's your favorite part? And what are the things? Almost like sort of a little analogy to Karl May, when he finally sort of slowed down with writing, and actually was then traveling to the place that he visited. Which would be now that you hopefully get a little bit more time, which would be the places maybe connected to Karl May that you would like to see that you haven't seen? Also wo es diese Parallele gibt vielleicht zu Karl May, wo der sozusagen später dann etwas weniger geschrieben hat und dann auch mehr reisen konnte. Was sind so deine persönlichen Reiseziele, Träume oder Orte, die du noch sehen möchtest, jetzt wo du vielleicht ein bisschen mehr Zeit hast?
Ich bin sehr historisch interessiert und an manchen historischen Orten in den Vereinigten Staaten war ich. Also in Tombstone, nicht? Das ist ja so eine Legende, die auch in Europa, da braucht man bloß das Wort Tombstone sagen, da wissen die alle Bescheid. Und mich interessieren nochmal die Städten, wo der Bürgerkrieg stattgefunden hat, dort Gettysburg oder so, also diese historischen Städte. Aber auch wenn man das schon einmal erlebt hat, den Grand Canyon. Das ist immer wieder eine Faszination. Aber man könnte jetzt schwärmen und viele Städte in den Vereinigten Staaten aufführen. Auch Hawaii, wunderbar. Ich ärgere mich, dass ich damals nicht in Deutschland gebucht habe, den Flug zu den Nebeninseln. Ja, und das will ich nochmal nachholen, das ganz sicher. Ja, und natürlich auch andere Teile der Welt, wo Kulturgeschichte geschrieben worden ist. Mal die Pyramiden von Gizeh und die Akropolis, aber auch, ja, in diesen Kulturen kenne ich mich weniger aus, Indien oder China, wo Weltgeschichte geschrieben worden ist, wo Weltkulturstätten sind. Ja, das sind so Träume. Wohl wissend, dass nicht alle Träume im Leben in Erfüllung gehen. Da ist auch die Lebenszeit zu kurz und der Geldbeutel zu schmal. Und aus dieser Kombination heraus wird es sicher eine Auswahl geben, aber die Vereinigten Staaten sind ganz sicher dabei. Alaska reicht, glaube ich. Aber wie gesagt, ich möchte jetzt nicht schwärmen, da könnte ich noch eine halbe Stunde erzählen.
Yeah, Rene says there are many places that he would like to see. He's very open about cultures that he hasn't seen, which is India and China. But then more so the kind of cradles of world culture as the Egyptian culture, the pyramids of Gizeh. But foremost, he's really interested to see more of American culture. Places where the Civil War started in Gettysburg, and the Grand Canyon just has a fascination. I was saying we have the little Grand Canyon here. You also said you wouldn't mind seeing our Hawaiian canyons, which I just had the privilege to see the one on Kauai, which I was very, very blown away, and that made you a little bit sentimental, because when you had the chance to see Hawaii at that time, booking the inner island flights wasn't that easy. So you basically, I shouldn't say, because then people are really mad at me because it's about our Oahu and Honolulu, but you basically got stuck there and you didn't have the chance. So hopefully you come back now, you know more people, so you're more than welcome to connect to us. And by the way, there's a really interesting, if you look at Hawaiian culture, there's also an interesting thing to compare, obviously, to the mainland and to here, and the interest of other cultures in other cultures. So that's a very interesting thing. You had been mentioning the default places that someone who's been interested in American culture and the Native American, that there are places they have to go, and you mentioned Tombstone. And I probably want to make that sort of my next sort of little reflection, because as I said, the last time we have met, well, we met here every year, but the last time we spent a couple, hours and actually a day together was in Tombstone, Arizona, where you were interested in opening a little branch of your museum in Tombstone. And then we had this sort of interesting situation that you got in touch with a gentleman from Bavaria, from Munich, who also talking childhood dreams and boys' dreams, was basically fulfilling himself that dream in becoming the developer of a little village that was a little, we can call it hotel or motel, and he themed it around Wild West. And he had us as guests, and we had a wonderful dinner there, and had some very intriguing kind of talk and discussions about. So that's an interesting, that over and over again, I think the more the Karl May history gets passed on, it just resonates with people, and even to a degree that a pretty much down to earth, with both his feet on the ground businessman basically was saying, well, I want to do that. I want to go to another country. I want to buy a piece of dirt, let's face it, because this is out there in the dust. You just keep on going Main Street, Tombstone, and just, we couldn't even see the car. I couldn't see the car which you were driving in front of me because it was so dusted. And eventually he basically said again, most of his guests are German again, German other business people who just, they could probably go anywhere in the world, because they have the money, which we said for us normal people, traveling will, even though you could do it theoretically because there's no society that restricts you, but it's capitalism that restricts you because, we only have limited resources to travel. So many Germans are still fascinated by this by this dream. As Americans, we should also mention that vice versa. They want to see Germany because they consider that to be the cradle of culture, and everything is so old, and relatively speaking it is. And then they go to Bavaria most likely. Maybe we should, getting closer to the end of the show, so maybe we spend a couple of minutes talk about the state, Saxony, that we had a little interesting spontaneous discussion about yesterday. But the stereotype for Americans to go is Bavaria. That's kind of what they consider to be Germany. And then they go to Neuschwanstein. And Neuschwanstein, once again, is an interpretation. It is not old, it's fairly young, it has central heating. At its time was like phenomenal innovation, and it was the most modern you can get. But it was, once again, sort of a romantic and, reflection of one of the last kings on past culture, on medieval culture. And I always felt bad when I was still teaching in the Midwest in Lincoln, Nebraska. I had a colleague of mine who was in the marketing department and advertisement, and she was taking her students there, and then she ran into me, and so I happened to be then the architectural tour guide. And I think I demystified a little bit when I said, well, this is basically the German Excalibur relating to the hotel in Vegas, which is as a little authentic in sort of a strict way of looking at it, but it is authentic in terms of a reflection and an imagination of people. You just got to make sure that you tell people about that it's not real. But once you have told them what about it is real, I think you're okay, and you can help people sort of enjoying these kind of dreams. So ja, vielleicht, ich glaube, wir haben ein paar Minuten noch übrig, dass wir ein bisschen über Sachsen reden. Gestern unser Gespräch, Sachsen war ja viel größer als, und auch Niedersachsen, nicht? War ja mal, wie der Name schon sagt, Teil von Sachsen. Und ja, interessant eben dann sozusagen zum Abschluss ist ja dann, dass, wie gesagt, der Amerikaner eigentlich nach Bayern es zieht als sozusagen das Ziel. Wenn man Deutschland bucht, dann bucht man München und die Alpen und Neuschwanstein, aber dann an zweiter Stelle dann ja schon sozusagen dann auch Sachsen und Radebeul und das Karl May Museum. Das ist ja sozusagen dann auch wirklich eine Errungenschaft. Ne? Ja, ein bisschen über Sachsen.
Ja, die sächsische Geschichte ist natürlich unglaublich interessant. Die sächsischen Könige waren kunstinteressiert, im Gegensatz zu Preußen. Da gab es immer so die Reibereien. Die Preußen waren militärisch besser, aber die Sachsen haben das Geld eher investiert in Kunst und Kultur. Was in der Geschichte auch dann zu manchen Niederlagen geführt hat, militärischen Niederlagen geführt hat. Das ist das eine. Das andere ist, es ist wunderschön, wenn man betrachtet, dass der Karl May, um noch auf ihn zurückzukommen, wenn man die sächsische Schweiz, also eben diese kleine Gebirge da elbaufwärts, wenn man das in der Dimension verzehnfacht, die Höhen und die Größen, dann ist man den Grand Canyon sehr nah. Und so entsteht auch Fantasie, dass man sich hineinträumt in eine kleine Geschichte und die dann mit der Fantasie dann ausbaut. Und die Sachsen waren immer fantasievoll. Eben der Zwinger oder all diese Dinge, die Amerikaner jetzt Gott sei Dank auch erleben können, nachdem der Eiserne Vorhang gefallen ist. Ich meine, der Hang, da könnte man neidisch werden, der Hang zu Bayern ist ja auch dadurch begründet, dass im Zuge des Zweiten Weltkrieges die Amerikaner in Bayern gelandet waren und wir waren russische Pächter. Wir waren von den Russen hier besetzt. Und jetzt besteht aber die Möglichkeit, dass man sich gegenseitig kennenlernt. Die Sachsen, Bayern, also übrigens hat Karl May auch über den Ludwig II., diesen Märchenkönig, auch geschrieben. Das ist auch so eine Geschichte für sich. Ja, also es gibt nur wenige Persönlichkeiten des 19. Jahrhunderts, über die Karl May nicht zumindest erwähnt hat. Ja, und wenn man diese Fantasie hat und dann auch ein bisschen Wissensdurst hat, dann versucht man der Realität auf die Spur zu kommen, sich damit zu beschäftigen und das dann wieder in spannende Geschichten.
Yeah, that's extremely interesting what you just said. So keywords for me are kind of imagination and education through imagination is probably one of the key components of what you just said. So he said it's interesting to see how things really came together, that maybe for a good reason Bavaria, that one could be jealous of or envious of being sort of the primary tourist focal point of Americans coming to Europe or to Germany, might also have to do that the Bavaria was the zone that has been governed by the US. So we can also see commercialization, try to avoid to say propagandization, having been a key player, whereas Saxony, which you pointed out very eloquently, different than the Prussians, which again northern Germans, were. They were, the Prussians were leaders as far as military-wise and being strict and being aggressive, so to speak, whereas the Saxons had an interesting culture, and the kings were dedicating or allocating a significant amount of their resources in art and culture. So they're investing in buildings. Building culture was a big thing. They were building museums. They were building parks. They were really investing in education, which wasn't always to their advantage. Caused a lot of friction, caused a lot of criticism. But it's a very rich sort of a background and a culture that now, after the wall came down, Rene says so, sort of really in the spirit of Karl May. So I think he's living in you by now after 28 years. I think you carry on the spirit of talking together and sort of intercultural communication. And the wall coming down, and now sort of Bavarians can talk to Saxons, and Saxons can talk to Bavarians, and that all will eventually get to America. So Americans will find out, okay, there's more than we thought there is. So that's a really interesting thing. And you also said, that comes back full circle to Karl May, that he also wrote about Ludwig II, who was that king who built Neuschwanstein, was the client of Neuschwanstein. So really, really, so your sort of your final, and again kind of repeated plaidoyer is basically for being open, being eager, and everything comes from imagination and curiosity. So first of all, you're interested in something, you create an excitement about it, and once you start to get your mind going and you think, you enjoy, and this enjoyment sort of fuels a further interest that becomes then solid education and learning about things and gathering data. And that's what Karl May basically did, right? He got excited about a topic and he did phenomenal research. So even though he couldn't go there, but he went to the libraries, he talked to people. So he tried to get as close to the reality, yet knowing that it wasn't real. He was on a mission, and the mission was humanity, and he was a humanist, and he wanted to talk about societies getting along with each other. So he was a diplomat to that degree, right?
Ja, wir Sachsen waren immer pfiffig, wie wir hier sagen, und viele Erfindungen des 19. Jahrhunderts wurden hier in Sachsen gemacht. Auch 20. Jahrhundert. Also der Kaffeefilter, ich meine, das wird in Amerika auch bekannt sein. Oder der Wirkstoff vom Aspirin, der ist hier in Sachsen erfunden worden und hat weltweit bekannt. Ne? Und da könnte man noch weitere Dinge aufzählen. Mit anderen Worten, die sind fantasiebegabt und sind auch begabt, die Fantasie dann umzusetzen.
Rene points out that maybe another similarity between, we could probably say this is more all-encompassing, indigenous cultures who in all places in the world had been very inventive. They had to make something out of nothing. Make diamonds out of dirt is another way of saying it. This is the steam train, by the way, in the distance again, if we can listen to that. And he says that's something that the Saxons are known for and have been known for. And for example, interesting also for America, the coffee filter by Melita is an invention out of Saxony. And the other example you said was the aspirin, or which I guess is probably Tylenol also as a product in America, but that sort of main essence has been invented here and many other things. So it's a very innovative, and actually today, these days, there's a lot of industry, high-tech industry, sort of, it's almost like some call the area around Dresden the kind of the Silicon Valley of Germany. So there's a lot of high-tech, innovative business and industry basically choosing Saxony, probably because of this kind of inventive, imaginative spirit that, to a certain degree, you know, Karl May lived. And again, I shouldn't forget that you were talking about the area around Dresden, which there's a mountain area that we call the Saxonian Switzerland, so to speak. And I used the term bonsai before, and he smiled. It's basically sort of a miniature version of what we come back to imagination, what one could imagine to be the Grand Canyon. But it comes, you know, it is smaller, but there are certain features that are reminiscent, and it takes the imagination to make them as big as the ones one dreams of.
Dieser Hang, dass wir auch viele Erfindungen gemacht haben, das ist unsere Form von Pioniergeist, der sächsische Form. Ja.
So Rene says that this kind of basically skill or talent for inventing things is sort of the Saxonian equivalent to the pioneering. So instead of going out and physically moving on, you guys went creatively on and moved on, and in your mind imagined things and created them, and created the beautiful culture and quality of life in your state of Saxony. So I think with that we're close to the end. Rene, thank you very much for taking your time, for the friendship and for your leadership of the museum, which is a very important cultural institution. And keep up the great work, be involved, but also, you know, try to fulfill as many of these dreams that you shared with us. So,
ja. Danke für die Möglichkeit, Sachsen darzustellen und etwas zu Karl May zu sagen. Viele Grüße nach Hamburg.
All right. Rene thanks you guys for having the chance to talk about Hawaii, about Karl May, and he greets everyone back in good old Hawaii. So thank you very much. See you next week.